Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. The text of brief for this presentation included looking at safeguarding student well-being and an evaluation of continuous improvement. So the pandemic has intensified the focus on student well-being, and the need for providers to address this issue places it firmly in the sights of the regulator. Well-being is a holistic concept which consists of both mental and physical wellness. And in this, I incorporate SASH as part of my discussion. So in the words of our students, I found mental health a major consideration during my study. The combination of a long research project, a topic that deals with measures of trauma, the ongoing impact of COVID on our family, separation from elderly and overseas members, and our livelihood has presented unforeseen challenges. Borne privately, the cost of mental health support are an added burden. My lecturers showed they cared about me and my studies, especially during a pandemic and lockdown when we all faced untouched territory, and they reached out to set up one-on-one Zoom calls to ensure I was supported and bent over backwards to help me to succeed when I was really struggling in my studies and mentally. The voices of two students providing this feedback on their current study experience and the challenges to them of mental health. But before I delve into mechanisms of the continuous improvement of our institution, let me set some context. In August 2017, the Australian Human Rights Commission released the results of its research and made 9 recommendations to universities in its Change the Course National Report on Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment. Initially, the recommendations were made to universities, but it soon became apparent that the inquiry and the recommendations should be extended to providers across the higher education sector more broadly. It was also determined that regulator consultation and engagement with the universities and the new HEPs would play an important role in the continuous monitoring and improvement process to follow. So while serious in its findings, the report was only scratching the surface of some very real challenges facing our students, and more was to come. As the world responded to the global pandemic, an increasing spotlight has shone on mental health issues. Statistics demonstrate the need for the spotlight, and the sobering data reveals the following. Although not a new topic, research shows that mental health difficulties are prevalent in university student populations across Australia, the UK, and the USA. University students are at a high-risk population for mental health difficulties, given the prevalence of the challenges is highest in the age group of 16 to 24-year-olds. However, empirical studies suggest that young people undertaking university study may be experiencing higher levels of psychological distress than their peers in the general community. And Stallman notes that 19% of students reported high distress compared to 3% of the population. Commencing first-year undergraduate students often report more distress than subsequent year students, indicating the decline in student well-being occurs during the first year of their study and persists through degrees. International and domestic students report similar levels, and while the academic field of study accounts for some variation in student distress levels, high levels of distress are recorded for students in diverse academic programs. So the tertiary environment can either support or undermine student mental well-being by magnifying or mitigating the stress factors associated with it. As noted by one student, I feel as though universities believe their role is purely educational, showing how universities can contribute to mental ill health and how problems can cause unequal playing fields in the university settings, and this is why we need to have universities to take responsibility to make change. Student mental health and well-being was exacerbated by a number of new factors, for example, COVID, online learning, subsequent fallout in terms of finance and travel between countries. And this statistical data, combined with Texas research and interest in attrition rates of first-year students, has warranted immediate attention. Research is demonstrating a correlation, unsurprisingly, between high-stake courses and student well-being, as well as recognizing the connection between student well-being and ultimately student success. But what is mental health issues? What is mental health and how is it affecting our students? And I provide a definition to assist with our task at hand. Mental health is an integral element of a person's overall state of health. It's an umbrella term encompassing a a range of mental health states from diagnosable mental illness and mental health difficulties at one end of the spectrum to mental well-being and a state of flourishing at the other. So a positive state of mental health, or thriving or flourishing, requires more than the absence of just mental health difficulties. Well-being is associated with experiences of personal growth, intrinsic motivation, positive relationships, autonomy and competence, and a person's mental health fluctuates over time in response to many factors, including safety, physical health, life events, and environmental conditions. So to say this is a complex issue is an understatement. Much of the literature on student well-being is focused specifically on psychological well-being, with a recent review highlighting psychological distress as a worldwide issue for university students. For students studying at university, maintaining optimum health, mental health, and well-being safety is imperative to enable to participate and engage in all aspects of learning, including, but not limited to, lectures, tutorials, laboratories, workshops, assessment, and practicums. And because of the repercussions from the disruptions of 2020, university students are under increasing pressure as they adapt to considerably different study conditions. So the outcomes of the increasing challenges facing our students can be anxiety, burnout, poor performance, breaches of academic integrity, and withdrawal from courses of study. It's become imperative for providers to understand and address these issues. And there are numerous reasons which contribute to the increasing anxiety students are feeling, including lack of connection, perceived workload, time management, lack of sleep, living away from home, financial pressures, unmet, unanticipated, or inflated expectations of self or university experience, and pressure to excel in an increasingly uncertain and competitive job market, as well as the academic rigor of the higher education system. This combination of factors will result in or exacerbate the mental ill health among students, and these challenges will vary depending on the student cohort. For example, many of our current students include international students in a post-pandemic environment facing increasing financial pressure, greater family challenge, as well as academic pressure. Also include students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, first in family, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, and those from rural areas. There's been an increase in these cohorts over the past decades. So why don't students disclose more? Perceived stigmas around ill health, fear of lack of understanding by academic and administrative staff, fear of disclosure that may jeopardize reputation and/or studies. Furthermore, perceived options are available to students in their minds is to quit their studies, which has a further impact or implication on their mental well-being, finances, and future. So this leaves me with the question of what can we do and what are we required to do? The regulator wants to raise awareness, educate and support the sector by sharing resources and good practice to address risk to students, including mental health. TEX appreciates that there can never be zero risk. Understanding and preventing and responding to both appropriately to sexual assault, sexual harassment, and student well-being is a matter of concern for all higher education providers. And TEX also appreciates that there's a range of responses to managing these risks, and that they might be quite different for each provider, depending on the provider's individual context. So in terms of provider responsibility, student well-being and safety is everyone's responsibility. So I'll now turn my attention to the continuous improvement by a smaller university college. Who is Alphacrucis University College? A faith-based institution that does not include student residence and does include dry campuses. One could perceive that students at these institutions are safe. The reality is issues of SASH, online harassment, and mental unwell-being occur wherever people are in community. AC commenced in 1948, equipping students in the areas of theology, ministry, business, leadership, teaching, music, chaplaincy, and counselling. And since 2000, AC has established a network of campuses in every major Australian state, as well as in New Zealand. AC has a diverse range of accredited programs, from vocational certificates through to PhDs. Lectures can be taken online or face-to-face in class. AC also has a number of third-party arrangements both in Australia and overseas. In 2022, Alphacrucis was registered by TEXA as a university college, and the decision makes Alphacrucis only the 4th university college in Australia. SASH was an important consideration in the university college application submitted in 2020. The evidence provided to TEXA included overarching document outlining the policies, procedures, and plans relating to prevention, monitoring, and reporting of sexual assault and sexual harassment. SASH was also an important topic of conversation at the Higher Education Private Providers Quality Network, or HEPQN. It was so important that a community of practice was developed with participating members and the then senior project manager at TEXA, Dr. Irene Lichtbach. In terms of academic governance, the academic board oversaw a number of relevant activities, including opportunities to engage in sector initiatives. Staff attended SASH training workshops, for example, at the Independent Higher Education Australia Network, or HIA. In 2019, the Executive Committee commissioned an external moderation of the SASH at Alphacrucis, which was undertaken by a registered psychotherapist in private practice, as well as an external moderation of student services and support systems, and the responses were tabled to Academic Board and the Executive. The actions and responses included, as a result of these discussions and reviews, a SASH prevention, support and reporting action plan for 2019-2020 was developed. Feedback was obtained from students, third-party constituents, as well as head of social sciences. We also developed a diversity and equity framework, students and support services framework, and a well-being and safety framework. All staff received training in matters relating to SASH, particularly first responder training across the campuses and the third parties. And this training was provided by consultants outside of the organisation. Providing information to the students through the Respect Now Always page outlined for students the reporting procedures and support options available to them. And as further evidence of AC's serious and intentional ongoing commitment toward promoting awareness and prevention, several AC faculty members and HDR candidates undertook research projects related to gendered violence and delivered them at conferences overseas. So what of the third parties? In line with AC's policies, all third-party arrangements are expected to comply with the policies and procedures, including those related to prevention, monitoring, and reporting of SASH. Each third party reports to AC on the measures they have taken in this space on an annual basis as part of their annual student services reports. Information about student wellbeing and safety, including information on SASH, is made available to all third parties through a handbook and as part of their orientation days. In addition, both AC and the third parties are encouraged to display posters, provide contact for mental health care strategies, guidelines for supporting services and reporting, and training for first responders, as well as a reporting of incidences register. An important consideration factored into SASH and the wellbeing processes included a review of the HDR programs, the guidelines for HDR supervisory relationships, as well as mechanisms in place for reporting breaches. Feedback provided by a student noted, completing a PhD is isolating, even more so during a pandemic, and it would be a credit to the college to have someone who could speak to the challenges facing students, including mental health. With all these mechanisms, policies and processes, the appropriate steps were in place, but something else was needed. And AC's internal data showed students were seeking more extensions, leave of absences, withdrawing and citing adverse mental health as reasons. Discussions of this priority via AC's internal governing bodies led to a conversation about mitigating risks to students. So in 2019, the School of Health and Human Sciences and other stakeholders at Alphacrucis University College launched the Wellbeing Centre in response to this need. Aware of the increasing needs in the area of well-being, mental health support, the Healthy Minds Initiative was developed, and the aim was to encourage mental well-being by providing scaffolding for dealing with personal challenges, developing a healthy study-life balance, accessing mental health support service, and building an inclusive campus community. The college promotes awareness and understanding of mental health issues in the work, research, and study environment so that staff and students can access this across the college. study stress, personal struggles, relationships disruptions, life events, and challenges, because life does happen, are the kind of challenges a student might experience when engaged in tertiary studies. The Wellbeing Centre is a free counselling service provided to the students by counselling interns on their placement. The objective is to promote student well-being. 60-minute counselling sessions are available face-to-face or via Zoom, where students are located close to participating campuses. Counselling sessions at the Wellbeing Centre are available throughout the semester. Each intern is supervised by a professional supervisor to support their practice. The professional integrity of the Wellbeing Centre is underpinned by confidentiality and trust. It's a safe space for students to explore personal challenges, to collaborate towards workable solutions, or in some cases, refer students on to specialised services. Staff are employed for this purpose, and the centre is overseen by 2 registered psychologists. Students are also provided with access to trained pastors or counsellors on campus or online. Since January 2020, 99 student clients have been welcomed to the centre, resulting in 369 client and intern counselling sessions. In the same period, the Wellbeing Centre has provided training for 13 counselling interns who went on to be awarded their undergraduate or postgraduate degree with counselling major. In response to the recent intake of international students, the Wellbeing Centre launched a Study Without Stress group to align with the cohort's timetable. The group is run online, opening the accessibility to students across national campuses. The Wellbeing Centre also became a crucial part of the Student Affairs Committee's response to student needs. Students who express or communicate challenges in their submissions are advised of access to the Wellbeing Centre in response emails. Faculty have noticed how helpful it is to suggest the Wellbeing Centre, as they feel they've helped students in doing so. So in evaluation of the strategy, the Wellbeing Centre continues to develop. The staff meet regularly to review the services offered by the centre and follow up on the social science students as interns who are completing some of their client contact hours for counselling majors. Confidentiality, congruence, empathy, non-judgment, and unconditional positive regard are the values held by the centre and are outworked in various ways. The Wellbeing Centre follows a professional code of ethics and ensures all interns behave and work in alignment with the code. So are the risks declining, increasing, plateauing? Well, overall feedback from the student client indicates a reduction in distress associated with problems and associated impact for which they sought the Wellbeing Centre for support. These include improvements to coping, including with studies in areas of life, problem solving, and a reduction in any elevated symptoms or impairments to functioning. A small number of situations were identified and risked as posing significant risk, for example, relationship violence risk and more serious mental health challenges. And here, the intern counsellors were able to formulate safe and prompt options, including referral services and other forms of support as needed. The team of the Wellbeing Centre were able to liaise with each other and assist with coordinating the appropriate care in response to situations. So in terms of the Wellbeing Centre, has an important part to play in the successful study journey for our students, and further recommendations to Academic Board, including continuing to resource the centre and its initiatives, persist. In wrapping up, the following practice for continuous improvement. Continuous and consistent engagement with students. Listen to what they have to say and act on what they're saying. Academic governance has an important part to play in the management of student well-being and safety. And continual education and equipping staff is an important factor in this process for both academics and administrators. And finally, recognising the important connection between student well-being and successful student outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will go to the Q&A now, but I did just want to touch on something you mentioned at the end, the importance of academic governance. So student wellbeing and safety should be embedded in everything, just like teaching and learning or in research. It's through the mechanisms, the governance mechanisms of the higher education provider. So that was lovely to hear that. It's not just something that is on the side that is done by a select few people, a team here and there. It should be an intrinsic part of the organisation. So I'm really pleased you mentioned that. And I'm really pleased you mentioned Texas Resources as well. So for those of you who don't know, we do have publicly available resources. They're being updated as we speak because we need to ensure that they remain current and fresh as public policy evolves and we learn new things and research evolves as well. But enough of my voice. I think I'm going to throw to the floor. We have a roving mic, Rodney, here, and he will take your question. And you can either direct it to Eve, Fiona, or Glenda, or all three.
Hello, thank you so much for those presentations, really enjoyed them. I'm actually one of the student council representatives at my university, so something to do with safeguard student wellbeing is very important to myself. A lot of the time there is emphasis within universities on prevention and training to do with prevention when it comes to student behaviour and misconduct and instances of reporting and things like that. But to do with the emphasis on support after the fact is a topic that's often not talked about. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on how we can best move forward to providing support in the instances where students have experienced sexual violence and things like that. So that can be to whoever.
Excellent question. Who would like to take that one?
I've been thrust.
Maybe turn it off and on again.
We're swapping. Yeah, I've been thrust the mic, so I'm going to reply to that one. Look, I think it's a really, really important area that we potentially don't actually pay enough attention to. Why? Because it's risky, it's scary. Trying to deal with a victim, regardless of what they're a victim of, is always something that presents an emotional difficulty for an individual who's that first responder, who's that carer. Not even a first responder, they could be third or fourth person down the line. So I think there are a number of things approaches that need to be taken, or a number of steps in an approach. And I guess I'm sort of speaking partly as a counsellor, partly as somebody who's been a first responder. And I'm not just talking about sexual assault. It could well be a suicide situation or any of the other spectrum of things that encounter a student's wellbeing or a staff member's wellbeing. I guess the first thing is creating that triage environment. It's then also extracting people from that environment who are ancillary to it. In other words, clear the space, but don't clear it to such an extent that you're alienating the victim and you're actually bringing excessive focus upon them. Bringing in the appropriate support mechanisms that either exist within the organisation, i.e. counsellors, trained staff who may not be counsellors, but also being very, very aware that there are times when it's beyond your capabilities and actually knowing to pick up the phone and call for help. Now that might be, and I'll give an example, not recently, but I'll give an example from my organisation where the student was incredibly upset. They were sitting in the office of the head of the campus. I was up the street, which was sort of convenient with where my office was, and they actually said, Eve, can you come down because we think that you might be the best one to engage with the student. The student happened to be gender fluid. And they said, we actually don't know how to deal with that sort of a person in this situation. We don't know what the sensitivities are that are appropriate. But what I did was, got a little bit more background, grabbed the local GP from the medical centre that's across the road from us, and we wandered down together. And what was happening there was that I was being coached and counselled and being prepared to deal with the trauma, because it's traumatising for me, so that we could then walk in together and I could say, hey, hi, I'm Eve. I know you thought you were expecting me to come. What I've done is brought along with me. We really just want to make sure that you're safe, you're healthy, and provide the most appropriate, immediate intervention we possibly can to look after you. And then we work through that situation from there. It's never a one case fits all. And I know we've said that in a couple of the other comments earlier. And I think that's the critical thing. So as an example, that ended up where the GP rang for an ambulance, the individual went to hospital and they were treated appropriately. Further down the track, they did go to the police and make a formal complaint. Obviously, people then were required to give statements to the police, but we allowed the authorities to manage that completely. So we were separating the institution and protecting our staff from trauma, but also allowing the student to be the necessary focus of support within all of the community networks, including the judicial and the policing circumstance.
Great. Did anyone else want to add to that, Fiona?
I can add a couple of things. I think similar to what Eve said, we're probably not doing enough. But the two key things that come to mind for us is, one, we have engaged some counsellors from the South East Centre Against Sexual Assault, and this has been a relationship for many years now, and they sit within our counselling services. And so when students disclose or report sexual harms to us, that's one of the options that they're referred to. And really, in terms of that ongoing support, that is really where we'd prefer they go, because they are the experts in that advocacy and ongoing support. And they've got various programs as well as just the ongoing counselling that they can provide to our students and to our staff, for that matter. The other piece, for years we have practiced as well that if any students disclose or report harm, we will allow special consideration and other sort of concessions for victim survivors as sort of an ongoing basis. And we're actually, it hasn't been explicitly enshrined in the procedure though, but it has been a common practice. But that's actually something we're in the process of changing, hopefully before the end of the year, which is very close now, I realise. But we want to put that special reference to that victim survivors of sexual harm or family violence, including coercive control, I think is the language we're going for, to make sure that they know that they can go report and disclose it, and that then that recommendation can come through in a de-identified way that for that and other behaviours, that they can get that support as an ongoing basis.
Okay, we might move to the next question, Rodney.
Hi, my name's Karen. I'm from Wentworth Institute of Higher Education. We are very, very small. So you talk about Eve at iCollege or Glenda at AC, they are giants in our world. We are talking about a student base of about 450 students, but growing. I apologise if my question is left field and it isn't totally relevant to the rest of the audience, but I feel it is important. We are a very small provider, as I have said. We do not represent a large majority of students, but if you look at the tail of higher education providers, there's a lot of us in the market who are small. We don't have a legal department. We don't have a HR department. Good luck trying to work out your pay. It's a bit like getting the Ouija board out and going, you know, what spirit has paid me this week? However, when it comes to sexual assault, sexual violence, intimidation, bullying, harassment, we are every bit as passionate as is UTS or Sydney University that's up the road. However, here is my problem. When I began working with my team 2 years ago on sexual assault and sexual harassment, and we sit on a community of practice with Eve and a whole heap of other higher education providers, I was overwhelmed by the amount of material that was there for the prevention and the support of SASH, and how to get, you know, we run bystander training, first responder training, all of that. I've been CASA trained myself, I'm not a counsellor. However, when my SASH working group sat around the table and we talked about the mechanisms of reporting, and then we went to, so Karen, what are we going to do if someone actually reports something? How do we investigate it? And I'd like to ask, and I'd like to highlight that 90% of the conversation in this space seems to be about prevention, support and the victim. I've never heard any conversations about what is done for the perpetrator to ensure natural justice, and I have still not been able to find a provider who can train my staff on what is the appropriate way to investigate these incidences. When you're in a small organisation that doesn't have specialists, I come from a HR background and the private sector HR, so I know a little bit about investigating from my own personal working life. But I'd like to know, is there anything out there that helps small institutions actually deal with, and it's, you know, I get if it's serious, you're going to call the police and off it goes, but it feels like you report sexual assault, sexual harassment, and it goes into this black box. My problem is when you don't have a group of people who understand the black box, how do you get the training to support them to make sure that the students are looked after? Sorry.
Okay, any response there with regards to investigating? How do you handle it when an incident comes through?
Yeah, look, I'll speak from a smaller provider, acknowledging your comments. But I think the important part of this is understanding what you can do, and when you get to that point where you're not able to actually effectively manage a situation, is to look beyond the organisation. And we have a number of different entities that we work with who come in and train our staff, and that would be my first go-to. I think there are some things that, because we don't have big resources behind it, we've had to then work collaboratively with others in the field, and that's the way we would approach it.
Probably a similar advice, and probably I think even when we were starting out, and we're lucky that we're resourced with teams to do this stuff that have come from backgrounds in investigation and things, but we certainly did. One thing was get legal advice on policy and procedures on processes that was external to the university. Despite we have a legal department, we got specialist advice on that natural justice and process. So I think for us starting out, that's probably the main one. Although I fully admit I am prevention focused. I'm not, response is not my area, but that is my high level understanding.
Yeah, look, I think it is. It's taking advice from legal advice, and it's certainly what we did, or I did at iCollege. The first thing I said was whether it was the area of SASH or whether it was managing under 18s and instances that occur there. It was, let's take legal advice. Let's look at the legislation in each of the states and territories that we operate in. What is the guidance that's provided there, but also what is the legislative expectation of an institution? I've also then followed it through with our accommodation providers. So we use a massive number of third-party accommodation providers, and looking at what are your policies, what are your strategies, what's your structure, how does this align with ours? I was really lucky. I'm only down the road from Sydney University, and they have a really great student welfare team there, and I spent half a day with them looking at strategies around managing under 18s, managing risk reporting. And the idea was that I took it from a cradle to grave perspective. So the student walks in the door, what do we need to do? Till the student walks out the door, what do we need to do? What's the perfect pathway? What's the less than perfect pathway? And what are the requirements fit against each of those? But I do think maybe that community of practice, which I know TEXA doesn't have the funding for in 23, but which I think is really important that we continue moving forward. I think it'd be great to bring in an expert, legal expert, to talk to us as providers.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Or not.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm from RMIT, a student representative as well. My question's directed to Fiona. So across a lot of different student unions nationwide, a lot of students are fighting for, or kind of advocating for, those modules that are implemented at Monash University around prevention, and it being compulsory as well. So I'm curious to hear about the data after those modules were compulsory, to see kind of whether there was correlations between some things. So for an example, being more reporting of SASH because people are aware of those services available. I know it said in 2019, so it's a bit difficult to go in the COVID era, but I'm just curious to know about the data that came out after that was compulsory.
Yeah, great question. I'll start off, I will be honest, I mean, I see limited, don't get me wrong, I think it is a critical component that is an introductory module that comes in that every student has to do, and I don't think I added it, but It's all students. We've got a nuanced version for HDRs and now one for staff as well. So it's compulsory for everyone in our community. And I think that's setting a really good standard of like, this is our baseline, everyone. And as well, here are the support services and reporting pathways if things go wrong. We have seen, and I can't recall numbers off the top of my head, but there has each year, we are continuing to see an increase in reports and disclosures, staff and students, of sexual harms. In terms of number progressing for formal, that we can take action against, and whether that's progressing, that there's sort of it's too hard to see whether we're seeing a real impact in that space, but certainly the number of disclosures we're receiving for incidents that happen off campus, there are lots more people year on year seeking support from the university, whether it's Respect at Monash as the module or whether it's everything else that we're doing, we're not sure. And that's actually part of this new evaluation model I was talking about, because we just can't distill properly at the moment where people are learning to report or to the support services. And that's a big work in progress because it is such a difficult space to evaluate. So I hope that answers your question. Happy to chat later as well.
Thank you very much for that great question. Okay, can you all please join me in thanking our amazing presenters, Eve, Fiona and Glenda.